Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Intelligence Mod Pod. As always, my name is Bobby, and I'm here to teach you everything that I know about Dungeons and Dragons. Now, before we get into the episode, I do want to clear up a little confusion that might happen during the episode. So, originally when we recorded this, we had anticipated on talking about damage types and conditions in one episode. However, we talked way more about damage types than we originally thought we would, so we decided to split it in two. So if you do hear us talking a little bit about, oh, conditions will be in just a bit, just know we will be bringing that out next week, and please forgive us for any confusion that might cause. But that's all I have for you, so back to the normal show. And today I am joined with Robin from the Knights of D20. Would you like to introduce yourself just a little bit?
Sure. I'm Robin. On the stream, I play Bula, the half-orc barbarian. I have been playing D&D for, oh gosh, over 15 years. A lot of the times when we play, we do different home brews, even like some sci-fi home brews, which I love. Um, but just always have loved tabletop RPGs. It's a great way to hang out with friends. It's a great way to just kind of blow off steam and just act silly.
Yeah. So with that, just completely off topic for what we're doing here. You say you really like the sci-fi streams, or
Yeah.
sci-fi tabletops. We had talked about doing some one-shots. You might have to run us through a sci-fi one-shot sometime. I think that would be really cute.
Absolutely. Like we have some that are like we concocted our whole system
Mm-hmm.
for like a Star Wars campaign that we've played for years and years and years.
I love that.
So it's
I
fantastic.
Yeah, I personally, I absolutely adore Twi'leks. So
Mhm.
any game, any Star Wars game I can play that I can be a Twi'lek, I'm having a great time immediately.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so we had kind of talked about like doing little weird offshoots. I know we had talked about doing like a Sailor Moon one shot, and
Yeah.
then I had been dabbling with this Pokemon tabletop. I don't know how into Pokemon you are, or if at all, but I know Kara said that her husband is like, we have to do it. So,
Oh my God.
so I'm excited about that. So today we're going to be talking about damage types and conditions. Whenever I brought this to the Knights, I was like, hey, I want to do an episode almost completely dedicated to conditions. And Robin was like, I love conditions. So naturally, I was like, well, let's get you on here.
Yeah, like I don't know why, like I've DM'd a couple times as well, for our group here. And one of my favorite things to do is to have all of our like our enemies and stuff when they attack, it just causes something
Yes.
because it makes things a little bit harder and a little more interesting. And like in real life, if somebody socks you in the face, if they hit you in the eye, you can't see out of that eye for a minute. So
Mm-hmm.
it does give just a little, another layer of getting it to feel almost a little more realistic.
Yeah. 100%. I also am a huge fan of conditions. I as a player of many different kinds of games, not just D&D, I love killing my enemies slowly. So like poison and whatnot, I that is my favorite. If I'm playing a damaging character, I want it to be something that slowly just saps the life out of everyone. Direct damage, not my gig, but damage over time, all day, every day.
Yeah, it's like just kind of watching it. They're just getting worse and worse and dying, and there's nothing they could do about it.
Yeah, like as a support player, buffs and debuffs, absolute favorite. Like even over healing, that is my favorite type of supporting is buff and debuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're gonna before we get into the actual episode, I do want to talk about the fact that you can see our faces if you're on YouTube right now. If you're if you're listening to us through Apple or hopefully someday Spotify, we should be getting that here soon. You can't see our faces, unfortunately, but if you hop over to our YouTube, you can if you're interested in watching us. But if you just love our voices, that works too. We love the support we're getting over on the pod. So all the other episodes are also going to be ported onto YouTube, but there will not be pictures with them. But if you missed so far and you're just now joining us for the first time, those will also be there. Or you can keep them here on the Apple Podcast. Whatever it is that you enjoy the most. So common terms today. We don't have any new ones today, but we are going to talk real quick about saving throws again, because this is a concept that we're gonna say the word saving throw at least 500 times in this episode. It's going to be every other sentence. So essentially that, again, is just when we are rolling a d20 to keep a weird effect from happening to us. So anytime you hear saving throw, I like to think of it as like you are throwing the dice to save you, right? For a long time, I struggled with, like, why do they call it saving throw? I mean, to this day, I still don't understand where that, wording came from. I don't. I think, though, my original introduction to the word saving throw was on a Star Wars video game called Knights of the Old Republic.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would say saving throw, and I had no idea what that meant. It was so confusing to me. I think that's why I put so much emphasis on teaching what saving throw means, because I, for so long, had no idea what it meant. It just didn't make sense to me, the wording they used.
Yeah. I guess, on the opposite side of that, it's always made sense to me. I guess because when we played, when something weird was going to happen, of course, they say, we would usually just say make a save, as just like an abbreviation. So I guess to me, it's you're throwing out that hope that you don't get the bad stuff happening to you. Throwing out that hope with the dice. Please don't. Please don't.
Please do not murder me, dice. Please save me from being thrown into the pit of despair.
Right.
Whatever it is that you need to use to remember what saving throw is, use it. We love coming up with stupid little things to use for Dungeons and Dragons. So I also wanted to talk, this isn't really a condition, but it kind of borders on that line where it's something that you can gain that's temporary, and that's going to be advantage and disadvantage. These things are so powerful. If you can get them, always get them. I think they're stronger than even a +3 or +5 on something. I don't know. +5 is pretty good, but
yeah,
advantage is so good.
Well, you're basically just giving yourself an extra chance.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so we just had to take a quick break because Robin's dogs wanted just a little bit of attention.
Oh my gosh.
I'll be honest, as we're recording this, I don't know where we're going to be editing at, So yeah, advantage and disadvantage, we're just going to talk about what they do really quick. So advantage, all it really is you getting to roll your d20 twice and take the best of those two rolls, which is so great. I mean, it can be awful when you roll advantage and you get like 2 1s, but
yeah,
the
I've
majority...
done it.
Yes, I think you've done it on stream.
I wouldn't doubt it. Oh, man.
So... the odds are in your favor that you are not going to get 2 1s. I feel like it's really, really strong. If there is a way for your character to get advantage on something, if you're like reading through your character description, or as we go through classes and we start really talking about how their features work, advantage is so strong. It's so nice, and it just feels good.
It does.
It does. It's so great. But on the other hand, we have this lovely thing called disadvantage. This does not feel good. This is essentially the same thing as advantage, where we're going to be rolling the d20 twice, but this time we have to take the lowest. And let me tell you, there is absolutely nothing worse than having disadvantage and rolling your first die and it's a nat 20.
Yep.
Just to have to re-roll and it's like a 4.
Yes. So it like never fails if I have disadvantage on something. Those are the ones that I know automatically I'm going to roll between a 17 and a 20.
Yes.
Every time. Never fails. And then after that I'm going to end up rolling like a 2.
It's always that way. I feel like it never happens that your first roll is the 2 and then the second roll is like, not that it matters because you have to take the lowest one anyway. But
right,
you always get taunted with the high number. If your first roll is low, your next one's also going to be roll. But if your first one's a nat 20, just know you've got like between a 1 and a 4 coming up next. Almost always. Or at least that's how it
It just
feels to me.
yes, just always has to taunt you just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely awful. Um, so yeah, advantage, disadvantage. These are things you really want to get. They're so powerful. If you can invoke disadvantage on your enemies, so good. I do want to say though, there are reasons I like advantage better than I like disadvantage as a player. And my reasoning, it's a little controversial, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and it's a lot of people don't like talking about this topic, but I think it's important too. And that's if you have a DM who's not honest with their roles, disadvantage can often feel pointless.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of DMs out there that roll thematically rather than by the numbers. You know, they'll do things based on what they feel like the players want versus, what the dice actually say.
Hmm.
Some people really like that. Some people really hate that. I'm kind of in the middle. I think there are times when, the DM kind of needs to fudge something occasionally. But for the most part, I like to stick with what the dice say because that's what RNGesus says to do. Um, but I do want to let that be known that, like, if you have a DM that you feel like is a little shady with their rolls, imposing disadvantage isn't always the best thing to do just because you never know. If your DM rolls in the open, absolutely, disadvantage is so strong against them. But that is something to
Right.
watch out for. And if you're a DM, if you are a dice fudger, please let your players know. If you have story things that absolutely have to happen, let them know that you're that kind of DM, that you are here to tell a story more than you are to like play a survivor game,
Hmm.
because not all players are going to like that, and some players might actually prefer that. If they're really
Right.
like new players, no new player wants to just constantly be getting bodied and absolutely decimated. They're going to
Hmm.
want a DM that, oh, I rolled a nat 20, let me just brush that to a side and make it a normal. Like, as a
Hmm.
DM, that's totally fine to do with newer players if that's what the group wants. Just talk to them. This is what session zeros are for right here.
Right.
This is why
Everybody has to have the same expectations and be on the same page.
session zero is so, so important so you can let your players, or as a player, be informed as to what your DM's intentions are, especially with
Hmm.
roles. If you go to a session zero for the first time and you've never done one before, this is the topic to bring up with your DM. Ask them, like, hey, how hardcore are you with the dice rolls? Because, if you're wasting your entire turn giving them disadvantage and they're not going to do the disadvantage because they want their big bad guy to be big and bad,
Right.
one, that takes away player agency, and two, you just wasted a turn.
Yeah. Well, and always make sure that you bring it up to your DM delicately, because let's be honest, a lot of DMs have a decent amount of ego because that's
Oh,
what makes the
yes.
stories good. And so if you just flat out and ask them, hey, are you cheating back there? It's like, no, absolutely not. But if
Yeah.
you bring it up, like you said, are we going to play this more thematically, or are we going to play it straight by the numbers? That's kind of, I think that's important just to point out
Yes.
that there needs to be a certain way to approach that one. But it is important. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that, it could, for some people, that could determine whether you want to play with that group or not.
Mm-hmm. And it's way better to start the game later because you're looking for people who fit your group better than it is to have your group deteriorate, 8 sessions
Hmm.
in. Because then,
Because
you're
so
halfway
much
through the
wasted
story.
time.
So much wasted time. You're halfway through the
Yes.
story. Now, if you start over from the beginning, the players know what happens for the first little bit. If you don't start over, any
Hmm.
new players are going to be very lost.
Hmm.
Overall, just be open because, again, being a thematic DM is not a bad thing. You just
Nope.
have to make sure your players know that that's the kind of DM you are. And being a hardcore dice DM is also not a bad thing, just as long as
Nope.
your players know. But
Communication is key.
if you're a DM that rolls 100% in the open, just know you terrify me. First off, I just want you to know that.
That's bold right there.
it's
Real
it's
bold.
it's so bold because so many of your encounters are going to be worthless because you're rolling low, and so many of your encounters are going to be so deadly. It's like it's such a toss up on what's going to happen when they roll in the
Oh
open.
man. Right?
Um, so moving from that, we're going to talk a little bit about the different damage types that are in 5e. So there's quite a few of them, and all of them are great except for one. One of them you really don't want to have because it's awful. But we're gonna start with our 3 physical damage types. This is bludgeoning,
Mhm.
slashing, and piercing. Now, if you are a martial character, if you're using actual weapons, not magic, these are your bread and butter. You're gonna be doing these a lot. If you watch Bula's slashing, right? Axes are slashing.
Axes are slashing. She has a hammer. It doesn't do as much damage, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not gonna lie, I love to role play a good hammer smack.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Like, I just the things that you can build a picture with that is delightful. Um, but you're rolling a lot less damage than with your sharp objects. So you're slashing, you're piercing, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense. I mean, blunt force trauma is bad, but
Yeah.
it's not going to go through something like the
Mm-hmm.
sharper things are.
Yeah, so bludgeoning, again, that's going to be like your hammers. This is like brute force that's going down. This is going to be a lot of just raw physical power. Your slashing damage is going to be all of your blades, your swords, your axes. These are things that like actually cut. And the difference with slashing and piercing is piercing you want to think almost like a thrusting motion. So this is going to be like the rapiers. I think can
Mhm.
daggers do piercing? I believe they do.
Yes, daggers are piercing, I believe.
If
See, I
they're
guess
not
that would make,
piercing, talk to your DM. I'm almost positive they will let you do it as piercing.
because I feel like a dagger, I mean, of course, this is just getting into like actual physicals of weapons, but
Hmm.
can be used either way. You
Yeah,
can slash, you can jab.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Daggers are amazing. Hold on, I'm pulling up. It is piercing, but I feel like you should be able to slash with them.
yeah.
Again, talk to your DM. Let them know, like, hey, I have a dagger. Like,
Yeah.
when you're making that attack, if you're rolling it as a slash, I don't see why your DM would have an issue with it, because realistically, if it's to get around, like, resistances, which we're about to talk about, I still think,
Hmm.
if your
Hmm.
players are playing smart and, like, flavoring their attacks based around, hey, this is what we want to do, this is what I'm trying to do, I love it. I'm here for it.
Yeah. I think that's the whole thing. Context and flavor is key.
Mm-hmm.
So most DMs are going to say, you know what? If you made that sound good, or yeah, if you can make it look good, then they're going to be fine with it. It's all about carrying on the story.
Yeah.
So,
The next thing, so slashing, piercing, a little bit different, but I kind of use them interchangeably depending on how you want to roleplay it. Bludgeoning, though,
hmm. Hmm.
very straightforward. You are just smacking the absolute shit out of
Yeah.
something. And this is where you're gonna see human teeth flying everywhere.
Oh my
if
gosh, with the human teeth. You had
um,
to.
yeah, like if you're getting smacked by a large meaty tail, it's probably gonna be bludgeoning.
OMG. See, that one didn't get me as bad as the human teeth did for some reason, though.
See, the human teeth I thought was grosser. The large meaty tail, it caught me so off guard. The next,
Oh man.
the kind of 4 that I want to talk about next or actually, I want to break these up into fire and cold damage. So
Okay.
this is pretty straightforward. Fire damage. This is, in my opinion, I think this is probably the most common. Um, this is probably the most common elemental damage that you're going to be seeing. I feel like anytime I'm getting attacked by elemental, it's always fire.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, yes.
Also, if you are one of the lucky few who is getting to fireball people, this is your damage. This is so much fun. Fire is great. I personally am not a huge user of fire magic in D&D just because aesthetically I'm more into like lightning. As
Hmm.
y'all have seen with the way I use Huthamer. So I play not wild magic, wildfire, and I just switched all my fire to lightning because I like lightning better than fire.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and on the flip side of that, we have cold. Again, that's cold. I see anytime. Yeah, it is what it is. I see
It's cold.
water. Water spells I see often associated. It's kind of a toss up between cold and acid, but again, that's why
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of acid. We'll get to that in a bit. But cold is kind of your watery stuff, and I don't really see a whole lot of cold damage. I don't think.
It's kind of few and far between. And again, some of this could be used more. We had a I played a game once where we had somebody who used cold a lot, but it was because they flavored it that way.
Mm-hmm.
They were kind of playing what ended up mimicking kind of like an Iceman from X-Men.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was it was interesting, but I feel like it was a lot easier for our DM to be able to get around it as well. Because how do you get rid of cold? You make it hot.
Mm-hmm.
And the same could be said the other way, but I feel like it's harder to dampen a giant fireball
Mm-hmm.
than it is to melt something.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that of the two, fire almost always has more damage associated with it also. I think cold
Right.
damage, though, oftentimes you're going to be slowing people, so it has a bit more utility behind it,
It does.
usually.
So you've got that whole sluggish thing, but also even if you think of like frostbite, okay, well that takes a long time. How fast does it take to get burnt?
So
It's
fast.
instant, right?
I'm
So if
surprised, as we're talking about, like, conditions, that, like, burn isn't a condition in 5e. I've never thought
huh,
about that, but
me
like
neither.
if you were at the dead center of a fireball going off, just this huge explosion, I feel like there would be some side effects to
Yeah,
that. Not just like
the
burn,
condition's
it's
just
really
called
hot, it hurts, and then it's
right.
gone.
The condition just says simmer. Like, I'm sorry guys, I'm slowed down because I'm simmering.
Yes. I need a break. I'm a little crispy at the moment. like almost imagine your character's like sunburned. Like you know how you have to move
Oh my gosh.
carefully.
Yes.
If you're
Somebody
out
pats you
there,
on the back and you take
yeah.
damage.
If you are out there listening and you have homebrewed like sunburn or like burn in general homebrew rules, if you could link those at the Reddit r/IntModPod, all one word, so we can see them, I want to use them. I want that
No
in my
kidding.
games.
That would be awesome.
The next two we're going to talk about is lightning and thunder. These two get mixed up a lot. A lot of people see thunder and they just think lightning in general. So lightning is exactly what you think it is. You know, it's hot, it's fast, it makes you do crazy convulsions. It's not
Hmm.
fun. Lightning damage again is my favorite of the elementals because I think it's
Hmm.
it's it's just fun. I like the idea of just like the call lightning spell is one of my favorites where you just continuously call lightning down from the sky.
Hmm.
So juicy. And I feel like thunder
So Pikachu.
oftentimes out of all of these, I feel like I said thunder. See, I just confused them. Lightning. I feel like lightning oftentimes is also very AOE, and I love area of effect. You know, I
Hmm.
like. I am fine doing less damage to more people than I am just doing one big hit.
Right.
Whereas, yeah, I feel
Because
like.
that can kind of spider out and kind of go through the ground
Mm-hmm.
to whatever is in the area.
I feel like cold. So of the ones we've talked about so far, cold has almost no AOE to it. You know, I think we have like cone of cold, and there might be like a summon blitz. I don't remember what that spell's called off the top of my head, but I know there's a big AOE one. But in general, it's not a lot of AOE. I don't think. Whereas lightning, I feel like
Hmm.
we get a whole lot that kind of splinters off and does quite a
Right.
few things, and it always has cool effects with it also.
Yes. Well, I mean, if you think about it, lightning in real life, you're getting electrocuted and burnt at the same time. So
Yeah,
yeah, it is gonna have some weird effects on you.
absolutely. Um, and thunder. Thunder is one that gets mistaken often. This is sound. So thunder is literally like I wish it was called. I wish it wasn't called thunder damage. I wish it was like called sonic or something. Because I mean that's
Yeah.
what it is. It's the vibrations of sound affecting you. Um,
It's a percussive damage, is what it is.
yes.
Yeah.
And I adore thunder damage because anytime someone takes thunder damage, I feel like it's often associated with movement also. So this is either
Hmm.
them, like you look at the cantrip Thunderblade, this is them getting hurt for moving, or you look at Thunderclap, this is them literally getting thrown back while taking damage. I
Hmm.
think Thunder's a great damage type, and I feel like it is not resisted ever.
Right. And a lot of times people forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have this kind of sitting in your up your sleeves or something, and you have I also feel like this could be really well role played. So you've got that up there, and it's going to make for not only a big hit, but a big memorable part of
Yes.
battle.
You know what I'm getting visions of the more we talk about thunder damage is imagine a like I don't really know how I would build this because bards themselves don't get a whole lot of thunder, but imagine a wizard that's spell focus is like a drum similar to a bard, like a battle
Oh
drum,
my
and it's like
gosh.
them booming the sound off of the drum.
Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
be really cool. That's like the vision I get when I think about thunder damage.
Yeah. I could see that. Or even, you you have your bard and you flavor it that you don't have just like a regular loop. You have like an electric loop.
Mm-hmm.
And you hook that thing up to some giant speakers. And the sound just reverberates out and takes everybody out.
Yes. Yeah, Thunder is so underrated. I think it's the most underrated damage type in the game. I think it's so nice. Again, nothing has I say nothing. That's probably a big dirty lie. I'm sure there's things that have resistance to it, but I never see it. Um,
It
I
doesn't come up often.
I do want to say that there is spell effects. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't even think it's in my list of effects that are actually in the player handbook, and I don't know why. But silence. I think nothing has resistance to thunder because if you are in like a silent spell, like a big dome where there's no noise, you cannot use it. So I think that's kind of its
Okay.
immunity.
Yeah. So there are things to counter it,
Mm-hmm.
but you would have to know it's coming.
Yeah. And let's be real, if you're silenced, you're not casting spells anyway.
True. That's very true.
You know, I mean, I could understand if you're like throwing a shatter spell into like a silenced area, like then it's like, oh crap, that didn't work. But like for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
most part, you know, if there's a silent zone, you know you can't do it anyway. You know,
Yeah.
there's not going to be many moments where you're sitting there looking at something thinking, "Oh, I'm going to throw some thunder damage," and then it's like, "Oh, surprise, no noise." You know, you're almost always going to know that there's no noise available. So the next two, and I'm also noticing that almost all of these actually do pair off together. You know, I thought it was just kind of the elementals and then the other ones, but they all kind of have like two that go along with each other.
Yeah, I
Um,
think you're right on that. Two that really like kind of complement or exact opposites.
yes. So the next ones we're going to talk about are acid and poison. These two, I think, are the most commonly misinterpreted. But I
Mm,
also think they are the most easy to like flavor as each other.
true.
So acid damage, I will be honest, I think is one of the worst elements you can pick. And the
Hmm.
reason for that has nothing to do with acid itself. It's because the spell list is not great.
Right.
They just don't have a whole lot of acid spells.
Yeah. So I have played a Dragonborn that my breath weapon was acid.
Mm-hmm.
It did come in handy in a couple really weird ways, but it wasn't like big in battles and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, every once in a while, if that's what I had, that's what I used, and sometimes it would do okay, and sometimes it's just kind of it didn't do a whole lot, or whatever we were fighting. Of course, oh, never mind, it does nothing. Great, cool. But there was a time when we were trying to open something or get through something, I don't remember. And, I had the idea, oh, what if I put acid on it and eat through it? And I flavored it well, so the DM let it go. So,
Yeah.
um, it's almost more like it can be useful in other ways. Not necessarily
Yes.
great for battle, though.
I agree. I think acid is far more useful outside of combat than it is inside. And along with all of these, people don't be afraid to, I don't want to say break the rules, but like bend the rules with them. Like, acid does not specifically say will burn through lock, but I mean,
Right?
talk to your DM. The worst they can do is say no. You
Right.
know, I mean, because that situation, you could fix that with cold damage, freeze the lock, and like hit it
And
really
break it.
hard. Like,
Yep.
get creative with these elements. They're really great. They're really easy to get creative with.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, acid I don't think is great. Poison also I don't think is super great. This is the most resisted damage type in the game.
Yep.
If you build a character purely by poison, take the poisoner feat. Do not go without it, because everything will have resistance to you. And we're about to get to what exactly that means for it. But acid is not super great. Or acid or poison are not super great. Even though I love poison, like, as an idea, I would love to play it like an archer that just uses poison arrows. But
Right.
5e monsters, they don't give a shit about your poison.
Nope. Sure don't.
The next two we're going to talk about is Radiant and Necrotic. I love these. These are so thematic. Radiant is just that holy light that both burns and singes. Bork bork.
Sorry.
It's fine. This is what dog owners who play D&D have to deal with all the time. As soon as we try to do anything, our dogs are like, ah! And I have huskies, so they're just like, every time.
They're super quiet, totally asleep until you're like, all right, let's play. And then, of course, they have to be
Yes.
in the center of everything.
Yeah, so Radiant, I adore it. I love it. It's so great. I feel like if you are fighting undeads, if you know, like, if you're going into Curse of Strahd or something akin to that, load up with Radiant, because it's going to come so in handy. I think Radiant is probably, in my personal opinion, Radiant is the strongest elemental damage type you can have, in my personal opinion.
I would agree with that, though. Just because it's good anyways. Like, even on just a normal enemy, it's still going to do decent damage. But then you've got all these other things where it's going to do double the damage.
Mm-hmm.
While other stuff, it's just like, it bounces off.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. You see that nothing happens. Dang.
And I feel like when it comes to Radiant, if something's going to not be affected by your Radiant damage, it's going to be, like, super blatantly obvious. It's like, this is an angel.
Right.
It's not just going to be, like, randomly thrown onto a monster stat block. It's, like, obviously Radiant being.
Right. Whereas sometimes undead can mask as other things, and then you don't know until you hit it and with something else, and they're like, oh, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, is this undead? Like, they're not as obvious.
And I think one of my favorite things is when you use, like, say, thunder damage against something, and it's like, oh, it doesn't rely on hearing, so it doesn't do anything. And it's like, well, that would have been lovely to know. So it's like, those kind of things can kind of be, like, hidden, you know, or, like, fire resistance can sometimes be hidden. I didn't expect us to talk about resistance this much, or I would have talked about resistance before we talked about damage types, but, Necrotic.
Right.
So good also. I will say if you're going into an undead themed campaign, this is not the damage type to bring. But almost any other situation, you're going to be golden. And it's going to be really strong for you.
Yeah. I like to play a lot of kind of darker characters too. And using that necrotic damage, not only can it degrade, but sometimes it's got like a lingering effect, or it can, depending on how you flavor it. But as we said with Radiant, there's a lot of things that end up being undead.
Yes.
And it was like you said, when you find out, like, oh gosh, why is that not doing anything? I have a DM that I play with in person currently, and one of his favorite things to say is, well, now you know. Thanks. Great.
Yeah,
glad I took all that time.
As a DM, I like to have my players roll either a Arcana check or a Medicine check to see how effective their attacks are doing. So I'll normally keep that hush-hush also until they roll one of those two things, or like maybe even Perception.
Yeah.
But yeah, Necrotic, excellent.
Yeah,
super
it's good.
Excellent. Chill Touch, when you're fighting a boss, Chill Touch is invaluable because almost all bosses regenerate health as you're fighting it, and Chill Touch will keep them from doing that.
Yep, absolutely.
One cantrip changes everything.
Yes, use it every time, and so they never can pick that back up, and then all of a sudden what's supposed to take you so long to kill is just like its biggest powerful thing, which is regeneration, because that's so hard to stop. Oh darn, that's gone.
Yes. And our last damage type is kind of the Lone Wolf. This one does not have a grouping that it kind of associates with, and that's force damage. if you can get force damage and you don't do it, you are making a mistake. Force damage, off the top of my head, I cannot think of a single thing that has resistances or immunity to force damage. It
Yeah.
is it is like renowned as the damage to do. That's why if you are a warlock, Eldritch Blast, you have a cantrip that does force damage, and it's going to be so reliable for you. Force is reliable. I think that's the best way
Right.
to describe force damage, is reliable. Because you look at the spells it has, Eldritch Blast, it's a good go-to.
Hmm.
Magic Missile, it doesn't miss. It is reliable. So when it comes to force, excellent choice.
When it comes to force, do it or you're wrong.
Yes. Unless, I mean, I've seen Warlocks not take Eldritch Blast for, like, thematic reasons. Go for it. I love a good, like, weakening your character for roleplay reasons. But
Yeah.
if you're playing a super hardcore campaign, take it. Force damage is so yummy. It's so good,
Hmm.
and it will not lead you astray.
Right. I mean, we've seen it do some really good damage in our campaign, on our stream.
Yes.
Um,
When
we,
Seraphina
we've
hits,
also seen it miss a lot.
yeah, a lot. No tea,
Oh
no
man.
shade, but like Seraphina's first 2 or 3 episodes, I felt so bad. I was like,
I
oh
know,
no.
but to be fair, it actually worked out because I feel like that was such a good growth moment for that character though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Sitting down eating the
um,
cheese was so good.
that was one of my favorite
She was
parts.
so pouty and upset. I loved it.
And it really, really flavored her character. So I feel like
Absolutely.
she definitely made the best out of it.
She really did. She was such a good sport about it.
Yeah.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is something I wish I had put before we talked about damage types because we said it so much. But hindsight is 2020. I didn't have my port and rolls ready, so here we go. Is resistance. So resistance, what it means is when you take a specific damage type, you take half damage from it.
Hmm.
So good. The most common damage types you are going to see is for magic is going to be fire and
Hmm.
poison.
Hmm.
Everything is resistant to fire and poison. So if you're using one of those two types, there's a lovely feat called shit, what is it? It's elemental adept? Is that what it's called? I had
Uh,
this feat in my
maybe.
back pocket until I went to say it. Hold on, I have the feats right here in front of me. Oh, I don't think it was I think it's elemental adept, yes. Where you can get rid of people, like it doesn't matter if people are resistant. If you're taking one of those 2 times as your main focus, it's not a bad idea to take that because you're going to be
Right.
seeing a lot, especially poison. Poison, everything is resistant to
Yep.
poison, and that's why I said
Like we
it's
talked
not a
about.
great damage type.
Yep. And then just for clarification there, when you say resistance, it means that when you take damage, it's half damage.
Half damage, yes.
Yes. Yep.
So yeah, everything has resistance to poison, and or not everything, but like I feel like 80% of the monster manual is like resistant to poison.
Right.
And fire, it's just a lot of them. If you're fighting like spellcat, like magical creatures, a lot of them are resistant to fire. Especially if you're doing like a hell based, like if you're going into one of the 7 hells, like Descent into
Hmm.
Avernus.
Hmm.
Please don't be a fire mage going into Descent into Avernus. Please.
Everything in there basically is already, so we
Everything.
don't need another one.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I didn't really like that module. I don't know if you've played through it, but as a
Mm-mm,
DM, I
haven't.
didn't enjoy it. I like whimsical and fun. I don't know if you can tell from Morroway, but I love whimsical characters. And for
Yeah.
me, it's like as a DM, I open the book and it's just like the first line is like, everyone is miserable. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Uh,
I mean, like legitimately in the book, it's like everyone and everything is miserable. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like this is going to be a fun one to play.
Oh my gosh.
And then physically, I feel like a lot of things, if you're fighting like knights and
Hmm.
whatnot, a lot of things are resistant to physical. I don't think anything is resistant to all of it, but you will find that most armored creatures you're fighting are resistant to at least one of the three physical, being bludgeoning,
Right.
slashing, or piercing.
Well, and if for any reason you're up against, like, say, an orc horde or something like that, all they have to do is rage, and they're going to be resistant to all of that.
All
Like
three of those, yes.
when Bula rages, I'm all of a sudden resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing,
Yes.
which is great on this side of it, not great when it's the people you're trying to hit.
Absolutely. And if you're debating on playing a tanky character, there's a huge hot take on what the best tanks are. Personally, I
Mm-hmm.
think barbarians are the best tanks. Me personally, as a support, if I could have a dream barbarian tank, it would obviously be either a totem warrior or an ancestral guardian who does sword
Mm-hmm.
and shield, because they're going to have a good AC and they're
Yep.
really, really tanky.
Yep.
But a lot of people really like doing fighter tanks, and I can understand because their armor class gets ridiculous.
Yes. Oh my
When
gosh.
you try as a DM, when you try to hit like that 8th level fighter, and they're like, my AC is a 28, and it's like, should we even be playing? Do you just want to auto sweep this whole thing? Like, because they're sitting there, and then there's always like the cleric that's like, I cast Shield of Faith, and they're just getting all these buffs thrown on them, and I'm like, what's the
Yeah.
point? What am I doing here?
Like, hang on, let me pull out my D60 dice to hit.
Right, let me pull out my D100 specifically for you. But yeah, resistance is great. If you can get resistance as a character, get it.
Mhm.
Like, it's never a bad thing. Like, fire damage, you're going to be getting thrown all the time. So if you're playing as a tiefling who gets fire resistance as part of their racial features, you're
Mhm.
already going to be in a great position defensively. I would never look at a tiefling who wants to be a tank and be like, oh, that's awful. Because it is built
Right.
in that you already have resistances. And there's so many, species out there that have these built in resistances.
It's
Um,
definitely something to think about when you're picking your character.
yes. Not that you should always pick your species based on what features they're getting, because play what you want. They're going to come up, but like, if you're really trying to be that min max, like super powerful character, look at those features. There's so many great defensive features out there outside of just, like, who is it? The Goliaths that get extra health, dwarves that get extra health, and like
Right.
having extra health is great, but let's be real, that extra 5 health that the dwarf has, is that better or worse than, someone hitting you with fire damage and it's 27 damage and you're taking, half of that 27 damage? That's worth
Right.
more than that 5 health.
Mhm.
Really look at these resistances because they're important. And if you're playing like mages or long range, look at races that have the magical resistance. You look at Morrowind. I have resistance to all saving throws for magic, all of them. So
Really?
yes, magical resistance is a satyr feat, and it's
That's
so powerful. I
awesome.
know I specific it's so powerful that I literally talked to Kara before we started, and I said I will switch that out for something different if you want me to. Because I know a
Yeah.
lot of DMs won't run like Yuan-Ti Purebloods or Satyrs, or I think I think the
Right.
Eladrins might have it as well. I'm not sure, but there's a lot of DMs that don't like magical resistance. But there's workarounds.
Right. Right.
Um, but yeah, so the most effective resistances I can think of that you can get would be physical, fire, and psychic.
Yes.
Off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything right now that gets psychic resistance. I think is there a warlock subclass? Do they get it?
I'm not sure about that. I know in campaigns that I've played before, we have found like magic,
Yes.
like artifacts or amulets or something that we could attune to that would give us that psychic resistance. Because yeah, when things start messing with your mind, it can get real interesting real quick. So having some protection against that is always, always, always something that you want if you can get your
Yes.
hands on it.
Yeah, I will say, I feel like I've said this somewhere before, but psychic damage is so terrifying because
Yep.
it's also usually linked to intelligence saving throws. And I
Hmm.
think with Kara we had talked about like all the different abilities, and intelligence saving throws are so scary
Yeah.
because it's like fire saving throw, okay, I'm going to take damage. Ice or cold damage saving throw, I'm going to be slowed a little
Hmm.
bit. Psychic saving throw, oh, I'm about to literally just die in one hit.
Right.
They're
I,
so scary. So,
you're gonna crack my brain open, and that's gonna be that.
yeah, it's I when I am told to make when I know a psychic saving throw is coming at me, I shit myself just a little bit because I hate it. And when I really want to be a mean DM, that's what I do. I give psychic saving throws. So if you're fighting like a mind flayer storyline, find resistance to psychic.
Yes.
Yes, and warlocks, not aberrant mind. I was trying to see if the sorcerers also have it, but they don't. The Great Old One, you actually do get resistance to psychic damage as you level, so that's great. So strong, so good. I just realized when we talked about damage types, we didn't talk about psychic. We're missing
you're right.
so much.
It wasn't even on there.
I guess
Why are there so many
so
types of damage?
I copy and pasted my list from the player handbook, and it was missing force and psychic. So psychic, yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah, and those are big.
It's so scary, but you don't see it often. Psychic is not seen often, but when you do, you know it's happening because your whole table is shooketh. Psychic damage is here to snatch your wig so fast.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, those are the three I would recommend. Would you agree with that? Any physical, fire, and psychic would be the ones to get.
Yes, because the first two, the physical and the fire, are going to be the ones that you're going to come up against the most. So you obviously want to be protected against what's going to hit you the most. And then that psychic one, like you said, it's not that often, but when it comes, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and not even because this won't help you with your saving throws with it, but the damage that's also associated with psychic damage is so high all the time.
So high.
So scary.
Well, I mean, obviously, because how much would it take straight to your brain to make you crazy?
Right. Next thing I want to talk about is immunities. I just want to say, if you can get immunity as a player, get it. It doesn't matter what it's in.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It doesn't hurt. Literally, it doesn't hurt. So immunity literally means you don't take damage from that damage type. If you are offered an item that gives it, take the item. If your friend has an item that gives it, take the item. You want this all the time.
Just snatch him and grab it right from him.
No, I would never recommend being the thief character that steals your partner's things, but you do want this really, really bad. If you can get your hands on it, fire and poison all the time are going to come up. Again, if you can get fire immunity, all the time. If you have fire and poison are also what the most monsters have immunity to. So again,
true.
Much like resistance, if you are a fire mage or you're doing poison shenanigans, it's going to be a bit more difficult in certain circumstances.
Well, you have those things and you build them up and you use them where you can. You just have to know that those are the things that, like you said, have the most immunity against them. And you have a backup plan.
Yes, have a backup.
You've got your big extra short sword or crossbow or something in your back pocket.
Yeah. If your whole gimmick is you only use one damage type, that can work. But please don't pick fire or poison as that damage type. I know, Fire Mage, it sounds so much fun. But if you do it, please take at least one cantrip that does a different damage type. Find a way to take Eldritch Blast. Have a backup Eldritch Blast and flavor it to look like fire. Please have a backup. Because immunities will kick your ass if you give them the chance to. And a lot of DMs won't tell you that immunities are kicking your ass until you've, used it 4 or 5 times.
Yes.
So, on the flip side of both of those, we have vulnerability. Now, this is going to be a lot like resistance, but instead you're taking double damage instead of taking half damage.
Right.
I cannot think of a position you could get yourself into as a player that you would have vulnerability. Except for, a spell effect. So again, this is something your saving throws are going to save you from getting this, but there are a lot of monsters that have vulnerabilities.
They do. It helps when you've got those gigantic monsters that it seems like there is nothing that you can do against them, and then all of a sudden you find their weak spot. And they've got, you finally stumble upon that one thing that just does way more damage than it should.
So much.
This is why.
Yes. So vulnerability, physically, I don't find many monsters that have
Mhm.
vulnerability to bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. But magically, I feel like as well as having the most resistances, I feel like fire is in line for the second most vulnerabilities. So I mean,
Mhm.
again, you're at this really weird spot with fire where it's resisted and immune the most, but it's also one of the top two that you can really do a lot with. So
It's true.
being a
Yeah.
fire mage, it's very tricky because you have to know where you're going to be super strong and where you're going to be very weak. Like you're going to have this very ebb and flow play style where
Mhm.
some
Mhm.
fights you are not going to be very helpful at all, and some fights you are going to be the absolute standout.
Yep.
Um, but if you want reliable procking those vulnerabilities, Radiant is where it's at. I
Yes.
don't
We kind of touched on that earlier. Anything undead, you're just going to decimate with radiant
roast
damage.
it. And even
Yeah.
undead, sometimes fire can do a lot for you also, but Radiant,
True.
Chef's Kiss,
Is
you're
the
gonna light
top.
them up. And I mean, I don't think I've ever played in a campaign that didn't have at least one encounter with undeads.
Right?
Ever.
Whether it's accidental or you've dug somebody up to ask them a question and it goes poorly,
Yeah.
you are gonna encounter the undead.
I have never played in a campaign that didn't have undead, or if there weren't undead, something akin to an undead. You know, like a reborn or something that's still
Close enough that
vulnerable.
still, yep,
So
that still
Radiant,
have an
again,
issue.
I will always, even over Force, I would rather have Radiant
Yeah.
over any other damage type because I feel like it's so, so nice.
Hmm.
Um, so those are our damage types: resistance, immunities, and vulnerabilities. We love them. Some of them we don't like. Looking at you, Poison. I wish Poison was more useful than it is. Thank you so much for joining us today as we talked about damage types. If you have any further questions about them or any other thing D&D related, head on over to r/IntModPod, and I will get to as many of those questions as I possibly can. Every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, if you head on over to our Twitch, we have our live D&D campaign, Dion Rising. Head over there. It's tons of fun. We're goofy, we're silly, we're emotional. We're all the things all at the same time. And here are all of our other social medias if you would like to follow us and keep up with the craziness that we are doing. We are throwing so much content out as much as we possibly can, and we would love for all of you to join us for that. Thank you so much, and until next time, I hope all of your intelligence checks are high.